Hello, this is Eco Threads Crocheting Sustainably, and in this episode I'm going to show you the basics of how to start crocheting sustainably as a complete beginner. Please note that these tutorials are meant to go hand in hand with my pattern booklet, but they both contain the same information. Today we're covering the materials and introductory lesson section. Okay, so this video is kind of long, so just stay with me if you see me looking down. I'm just reading on my notes. So this video is split into 10 parts: materials, prepping yarn, how to hold your yarn and hook, starting your projects, basic stitches, learning about crocheting, fastening off, weaving in ends, crochet skills, and reusing yarn scraps. So the first part is going to be materials. So in crocheting, you'll use a crochet hook, yarn, darning or tapestry needle, and scissors. Additionally, stitch markers are helpful tools when you have to crochet, but there's different versions that you can use and you don't have to buy stitch markers. So when you're finding crochet materials, you want to be conscious about your purchases to support ethical practices to become more eco-friendly, and consider the environmental footprint that crocheting entails before you buy your materials. And a good rule of thumb is to avoid plastic materials and synthetic yarns, or just overall buying more than what you actually need. Also considering manufacturing techniques possibly used in the materials that you're purchasing. So therefore, to address and help with this, I've come up with a variety of options to choose from that are geared towards crocheting sustainably. And note that some of these options may or may not work for you, and that's completely fine. Just use what you're comfortable with, because everyone's preferences are going to be different, like mine is. So starting out with crochet hooks, you want to lean towards wooden and bamboo hooks just because they're more environmentally friendly, but still look into the specific crochet hooks that you're buying. So here are just some options. There's the Hooks and Needles bamboo crochet hooks, and they're promoted as eco-friendly because it's made from high quality bamboo. These are actually the ones that I have, so here's what they look like. And you technically only need one hook for all of these patterns. You just need a 4mm hook, so this is the one that I use. So you don't have to buy all different sizes, just buy one size, and I would recommend the 4mm one. There's also the Knit Pro Dreams hooks, and these have hooks made from sustainable FSC certified wood, which is just a responsible source of eco-friendly materials. And lastly, there's the Furls Crochet Limited Edition Sage Ombre Streamline Wood crochet hooks, and these ones, this option is a little pricier, but it's made from 100% responsibly sourced wood, and it's handcrafted in India under high quality production. So they also have recyclable and reusable packaging, and they plant one tree for every wooden crochet hook sold. So this would be a stronger sustainable source, but again, it is a little pricier, and versus the Hooks and Needles crochet hooks, which are on the cheaper end. Again, it's up to you what hooks you would like depending on your preference and what you might find comfortable or effective to use. What you like might be different from mine. So moving on to the yarn, you'll again want to stay away from synthetic yarns such as acrylic or polyester and focus on more natural fibers. This includes recycled or your own reusable products. So some options are the Lion brand recycled yarn, which is the one I use. It comes in like this, and it's in a cone, and the reason this is one of my favorite options is because they use recycled yarn, and it's very affordable for the amount that you get because they spin a lot of yarn into the cone. Another option is going to be Cascade 220, which comes in a twisted hank. These are the two ones that I use for these patterns. However, although Cascade 220 is recommended because it's made with 100% Peruvian wool that's non-superwashed, it can be seen as an ethical choice. However, there are concerns about it being spun in China, even though the wool originates in Peru. So just keep that in mind when you're purchasing this yarn. But when I was creating the crochet patterns, I purchased Cascade 220 before learning about where it was spun. So just keep that in mind for when you're thinking about where your yarn comes from, and just know that my patterns do utilize the Cascade 220 yarn. Another yarn suggestion that I have is Plarn, which is basically plastic bags or plastic turned into yarn, and you can reduce waste by repurposing these plastic bags into making your own yarn. And this alternative It can be made at home by collecting unused plastic bags or if you have a lot of them, and ultimately this upcycling practice turns plastic into durable, waterproof, and functional items such as reusable bags or baskets. And only make plarn if you have a lot of plastic bags that you don't use or you want to upcycle them. Don't go out of your way to buy plastic bags so that you can make plarn. It should be something that you can already make at home. So to make plarn, you're just gonna get your plastic bag, and I'll show you how to do the first one, and then from then on you can do all the other ones. So lay your plastic bag just like this, flat out, and then you're gonna find the bottom. So this is the bottom, and then you're just gonna cut the seam, which is right here for me, so I'm gonna cut right here. Once you have that, your bottom and your top should be open. We're gonna turn it so that the side of our bag is on the bottom and then the other side is at the top. So your two opening seams should be at this end. You're gonna fold the bottom in about 2-inch increments all the way to the top. You're gonna get your scissors and then you're gonna cut each of these into strips, giving about 2 inches of space. Once you did that, you should have all of these strips. So you're just gonna open each of these up so it's in one of these loops. So once you have all of them into these loops, you're gonna take 2 of them. You're gonna grab one of the ends, put it underneath your first loop like this, and then you're gonna go back over and then through your first loop like this, and then you're gonna gently pull while tightening it, and then it creates that knot. So again, you're gonna get 2 of these, you're gonna go underneath and then back through the original one, pulling out and then gently pulling to tie that knot. Once you're done, you should have a long piece of just plastic yarn, and from here you can just wind it by hand. Thirdly, for darning or tapestry needles, there aren't many options other than buying these metal ones instead of buying the plastic ones. So I just recommend finding any darning needles that you can at your store and then buying those. Fourthly, you'll just need standard regular pair of scissors to cut your yarn. Next, for stitch markers, there's a lot of different things that you can reuse without actually buying stitch markers. So scrap pieces of yarn is a good option, and you'll always have it. It's accessible to you, and you can use it by pulling the yarn through the stitch that you want to mark. And you can just use any scrap yarn, or you can just cut off a piece of yarn so you can use it as a stitch marker, and then you can tie it to secure it. But scrap yarn would be my number one option. You can also use metal safety pins or key rings that you have just lying around, and then you can reuse it. You can essentially use anything small really, but it doesn't need to be something that you have to buy. Lastly, when you need to wind your yarn, your best bet is to wind your yarn by hand because it's the most accessible option with no waste or purchases. Okay, so if you're winding your yarn by hand, this is what it should look like. It's just like a little ball. So to do this, you're gonna wrap, you're gonna find the tail end, and then you're gonna put it along your 2 top fingers, and then you're gonna loosely wrap it around your 2 fingers multiple times until it gets like this, and then you're gonna gently pull it off so it'll look like a loop like this. You put it together, and then I just like to wrap it around like this a couple times, and then I just like smash this basically and then wrap it multiple times around the yarn itself so that it turns into a little ball like this. And then obviously if you keep winding it, then it'll turn into a bigger ball, but just keep going around, winding it multiple times around the ball like this, and then it'll turn into a bigger one. Whatever you do purchase, however, just make sure it's intentional and a conscious choice, because you only want to buy things that you're sure that you're going to use and you don't intend to waste. So don't excessively buy a lot, and just buy things that you know will last you a long time to reduce waste. For example, I don't buy new crochet hooks. The ones that I've bought since I've started crocheting, I've always used since then for years. So that can definitely reduce your waste. So part 2 is going to be prepping your yarn. So now that you've got your materials, you just have to prep your yarn before you can start crocheting. And just a quick note, your tail end is the short end of your yarn and your working yarn is attached to your ball of yarn. For example, if I had this skein of yarn, then this would be my tail end and this would be my working yarn. Now, depending on the yarn you buy, you might have to prep your yarn differently. So here's some common variations that you'll find your yarn in. If your yarn is in a twisted hank like Cascade 220, which looks like this, then you're going to have to wind your yarn by hand. Firstly, you would need to untwist it, and then you would need to remove the ties holding it together, and then find the tail end and then wind it by hand to turn it into a ball of yarn. If your yarn is in a cape like this one, you can either grab from the middle or the outside. I prefer a center pull, which is the middle of the cake, and it's just a lot more time efficient for me. If your yarn is in a skein, which looks like this, then you can either grab the tail end from the outside or from the center inside of the skein. Some skeins, the tail end will be on the outside, so you can easily grab it, but other times you might have to actually dig inside and reach in to find it. So just keep that in mind for when you're finding your tail end on a skein. If your yarn is in a cone, which the Lion brand Re-Up is like this, then you can just grab the tail end from the outside of the cone. Okay, so part 3 of this video is going to be how to hold your yarn and hook. So since you have all your materials set and ready, it's time to learn how to hold your yarn and hook. Note that there's several different ways to do this and everyone has a different preference again, but I would just show you how I like to crochet. But if you would prefer a different method, you're welcome to use other variations of this and look online. Okay, so to hold your yarn, you're going to use your non-dominant hand. So my non-dominant is my left hand and my dominant is my right hand. So I'm going to be holding the yarn with my non-dominant hand. So I'm going to drape the working yarn over my 4 fingers with the working yarn facing downward, and then your tail end should obviously have a magic ring or a slip knot as your start, but I don't have one right now. But you should have your foundational start, so your tail end facing upward, and then you're gonna wrap it around your pointer finger. It should also face downward as well, and then angle your pointer finger upward away from your middle finger, so it should be like this. And then you're gonna gently close your pinky and so that you hold your working yarn, and then this will create tension. You can see that my yarn immediately tightens up. But don't hold the yarn too tight or too loose, but with just enough force so you can crochet smoothly. And then this is more tension is discussed more later. And then you actually hold your project with your middle finger and then your thumb, so it should look like this. And then when you draw your yarn, you use the strand that's behind your pointer finger, so right here. And then if I had a slip knot, then I would have, if you do this like more quickly, you'll put this over your 4 fingers, and then you'll wrap it around your pointer finger, you'll close the working yarn with your pinky, and then you'll hold the project with your middle and your thumb. So it'll look like this. So to hold your hook, there are 2 main ways to hold it. The pencil grip, which is where your hand is under your hook, and then the knife grip, which is where your hand is over the hook. Both of these methods are actually similar to how you would actually use a pencil and a knife, and but these instructions just go over how to use a knife grip because that's what I use. So find the flat portion or the grip part of your hook, this part right here, and then using your dominant hand, which I use my right hand, you'll place your thumb on the resting flat grip, and then this should align with the head of your crochet hook, so it should be facing you. And then you're gonna place your index finger slightly above your thumb, like this, and then it should be directly behind your hook to guide it. So this is the front of the hook, and then your finger will be typically more behind the hook. And then your other fingers will just be used to kind of hold the hook, kind of figure out how naturally it feels, and that's how you hold your hook. Just naturally curl around your hook to find that placement that feels most comfortable for you. And to use it, most of the time your the head of the hook, which is the curved tip, will be facing you, and when you pull through a loop, you want to tilt your hook downward to catch the yarn and then smoothly pull it through a loop. And then when you insert your hook into a stitch, you also want to keep your hook facing downward. Sorry, it's hard to show, downward like this, because it's just easier to insert as well. And then when you yarn over, your hook will typically face you. So if you have the yarn over, I mean, you're just like kind of turning your hand, but the head of the hook will usually face you. Okay, so part 4 of this video is going to be starting your project. So to make the foundation of your project, there's 2 ways to start, with a slip knot or with a magic ring. Depending on your project, you will need to use different methods, but the project will state which one to use and which one to start with. Now, just a quick note before you start doing this, you need to know how to yarn over before you start. And yarn over is a term used to describe where your yarn is when you're crocheting a stitch. So basically when you yarn over, your yarn will be over your crochet hook. So when you make a slip knot, this is typically used to start a foundation chain to work in the row, or as the start of the chain 2 method to create a magic ring, which we'll go over later. Okay, so to make a slip knot, you're just gonna get your yarn right here. This is similar to what I showed you before. But you're going to use your non-dominant hand. You're going to lay your non-dominant hand with the tail end facing downward and your working yarn facing upward. And then hold this with, hold it with your thumb. And then with your dominant hand, you're going to place your thumb and your pointer finger right above your non-dominant hand, but below or like underneath your working yarn, and then both of your fingers should be about 2 inches apart from each other, creating a small gap. And so you're going to turn your fingers counterclockwise and downward to twist the yarn to form an X, and then you can see the X is formed right there. And then while your 2 fingers are holding onto the loop, grab the working yarn. Sorry, this is kind of hard to show. Grab the working yarn, and then you're gonna gently pull it through the loop, and then you should notice that it's closing. So just kind of pull through the loop you just created, and that will make your slip knot. Hook will go through this, just like that, and then to tighten it, you're just gonna pull on your working yarn while holding your tail end. To loosen the hook, you're gonna pull your hook up to loosen it up, but adequate space would be about this much space for your hook to fit, and then you can just like easily pull through and go through the loop. But also ensure that the tail end that you create while you have your slip knot is long enough for weaving. So you can see that this would be enough space to kind of weave in your tail end, so you were good. But if your tail end was created with too short of a tail end, it's going to be harder to weave in your ends. And if you create your slip knot obviously with a lot, then you're kind of wasting yarn. Now, moving on to a magic ring, which is also known as MR. This is typically used to create an adjustable ring or circle to work in the round for circular projects. With your non-dominant hand, you're going to lay the tail end downward and drape it over your forefingers, excluding your thumbs, with the working yarn facing upward. Close your pinky and ring finger to hold the tail end, while also holding the yarn with your thumb. Make sure that your pointer and middle finger are still extended straight outward. Now grab your working yarn with your dominant hand and wrap it around your two fingers, moving down and back up. This should create and form an X. And then again, you're gonna hold your yarn with your ring finger to kind of keep it stable. So now is when you get your hook, and then you're gonna face it downward go underneath the first loop, and then come up and over the second loop. And then you're gonna pull through that second loop and then face your hook upward. And then this is where I'll typically create my chain one. Now to create chain one, you'll yarn over through this yarn and then pull through that loop that you just made. And then gently remove your fingers out of the ring, and this is your magic ring. So again, you hold it like you normally would, and I just like putting my ring finger inside the loop because it gives me better stability, and you hold your project right at that little chain one. And so if you need to create more chains, this is just a chain one. If the pattern calls for a chain one, you already did it, you can move on to your next steps. If it calls for a chain two, you just chain one more, and then you crochet into the ring. So if I made a single crochet, I would go into the ring, and then yeah, you work inside. Now to close the loop, you want to just move this tail end up, and then you can actually close it like that. So this is how it looks a little faster when you get used to it. And also a common mistake is that you're too tight with the loop on your hook. So keep your tension a little looser so you can pull through that easily. And then again, to tighten it, you just pull on the tail end and ensure your tail end is long enough so that you can weave in your ends. And then hold your yarn in your hook as normally, and then hold your magic ring by the chain one with your non-dominant fingers, and then you'll crochet your first round of stitches as the pattern indicates into this ring. And when you finish with your first round, you can tighten the ring as much as possible to close it, and then you continue on to your next round. Now, in the case that you don't want to do a magic ring, or it's a little harder for you, then you can use what's called the chain two method to imitate the look of a magic ring. So this is typically used as an easier alternative method to create a ring, so you can work in the round for circular projects without actually creating the magic ring. So what you'll first do is actually create a slip knot, and then insert your hook, pull it, and then you'll chain two. And then you're disregarding the first chain you just made. You're gonna crochet your first round of stitches into that, the first chain you made, not the last chain you made. So in the second chain from the hook. Then you're just gonna go into that chain, and then you're gonna crochet whatever the pattern calls for. And then when, obviously when you go around, it'll create the look of a circle as you go around. Also, some tips for crocheting beginning techniques. Using the following methods to hold your yarn and your hook, you're ready to already start crocheting. Before you learn the stitches, keep the following things in mind. Insert your hook into the loop of your foundation starting point. Adjust the loop or ring so it snugly fits on your hook without being too tight or too loose. Keep your movements smooth and controlled, maintaining even tension throughout your project. Avoid gripping your yarn or hook too tightly or too loosely. Relax your hands to reduce fatigue and keep a steady rhythm. Control the size of your stitches. If your stitches feel too tight or loose, carefully adjust how you hold the yarn or hook. If you make mistakes, don't be afraid to undo your stitches, which is also known as frogging your projects, and then try again. Part 5 of this video will go into the basic stitches and the most common ones used in crocheting. You should be all set to start learning how to crochet, and then you're going to learn the stitches used in the pattern booklet, along with their abbreviations. Okay, so you're ready to create your first couple of stitches. So first we're just going to learn some of the basic stitches that you will need to know. So I'm just going to start with a slip knot to help demonstrate. So the first one I'm going to teach you is a chain, which is also represented as CH. So to chain, you yarn over, which is when your yarn is over your hook, and then you pull through the loop that's already on your hook. This creates a chain, as you can see, hopefully. And then if you do that multiple times, then you'll create multiple chains. So again, yarn over, pull through the loop on your hook. Yarn over, pull through the loop on your hook. And those are chains. Moving on to a slip stitch, which is represented as SLST. You'll insert your hook into the stitch. In this case, we're going into the chain, and then you're going to yarn over, pull through that loop on the hook, and then you're going to pull through the next loop on your hook. So you're basically inserting your hook into that stitch, yarning over, and pulling through all the loops on your hook, which should be 2. And I'll do that again for you. There you go. Then pull through. Next, we're going to learn how to do a single crochet, and I'll just start again. So this is represented as SC. So to do a single crochet, you'll insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull through the first loop on your hook, and then yarn over again, and then pull through 2 of the loops on your hook. I'll do that again. Insert your hook into the loop, or into your stitch, yarn over, pull through that loop on your hook, and then you should have 2 loops on your hook when you're making a single crochet. Yarn over, and then pull through the 2 loops on your hook, and that is a single crochet. Moving on to a single crochet increase, what you're going to do is basically put 2 single crochets into 1 stitch. So do what we just did. You make 1 single crochet, and instead of moving on to the next stitch, you're going to go back into that same stitch that you just created. So I'll show you here. Hopefully it's better. And then create another single crochet. So again, we're going to make 1 single crochet increase. So make your first single crochet here, and then in that same loop that you just went in, make another single crochet, and that is a single crochet increase, or also known as a single crochet, 2 single crochets in the same stitch. So next up, we're going to learn how to do a half double crochet. So to do a half double crochet, you yarn over before you go into the stitch, and then you can place your hook into your stitch, and then yarn over again, go through the first loop on the hook, yarn over again, and then pull through all the loops on the hook, and that creates a half double crochet. So again, yarn over, go into your stitch, yarn over, pull through the first loop on your hook, yarn over, pull through all of the loops on your hook, and that is represented as HDC. Next up, to create a double crochet, which is also represented as DC, we're going to yarn over, go into the loop or your next stitch, yarn over, pull through the first loop on your hook, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops. So you should have 3 loops on your hook, and you're just going to pull through the first 2. So that's 1, and then 2, and then yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops on your hook, and that's going to be a double crochet. So again, yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over again, pull through the first loop, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops on your hook, and yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops on your hook. So next up, to create a double crochet increase, this is similar to a single crochet increase just with double crochets. You're going to place 2 double crochets into 1 stitch. So you're going to place your first double crochet into your first stitch, and then into that same stitch you're going to create another double crochet. And then now you have a double crochet increase. And then I'm just going to go straight into clusters. So a cluster is also represented as CL, and that's when you have a group of 3 double crochets into 1 stitch. This is used in the granny square pattern. So we already have 2 double crochets in 1 stitch, so you just create another one by yarning over and then enter your stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, and then yarn over, pull through the last 2 loops. This is a cluster where you just have 3 double crochets into 1 stitch. So lastly, we're going to be making a treble crochet, which is represented as TR. So this is the last stitch we'll learn. So you yarn over twice, then you go into your stitch, yarn over, pull through the first loop. Now you should have 4 loops on your hook. You're gonna yarn over and pull through the first 2 loops on your hook. And then you're gonna yarn over, pull through the next 2 loops on your hook, then yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops on your hook. So you can see this creates a longer stitch right here. So again, yarn over twice, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull through that loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, pull through the last. Part 6 of this video will go into learning more about crocheting, and this section focuses on the essential details about crocheting. So first I'm going to talk about tension. So when you're learning how to crochet, having the right tension is the most crucial skill to master. If your tension is too tight, it's harder to return to your product from the small or stiff stitches, which results in a smaller size project than you intend. If your tension is too loose, it leaves empty space and holes with larger loose stitches. That creates a larger size project than you intend, which also leads to it looking distorted or wonky. If your tension is inconsistent, it also creates an uneven project. So practicing your tension is essential before you get into any project. Having the right tension allows you to crochet easily and efficiently. Next up is frogging your projects. And when you frog your projects, you unravel your stitches by removing your hook from the loop and pulling the working yarn to undo your work as much as you want to go. It's completely normal to frog your project, especially if you made a mistake or you want to try something again if you don't like how something looks, especially when you're just learning how to crochet. Don't be afraid to restart or try again if it's something that you need or want to do. So now I'm going to go over rows versus rounds. So crochet projects can either be worked in rows or rounds. Differentiating between the two greatly helps you to understand how to structure each of the projects. So for rows, you're going to be working back and forth from left to right and then right to left and then so on to build the base of your project. Rounds are worked in a continuous spiral, often to make circular shapes, but it can also be used to create squares such as granny squares. Okay, so when you're working in the row, you want to create your foundation chain from a slip knot, crochet back down your foundation chain, and then go back down the row you just created, and then so on. And then this builds your entire work by going back and forth. So to work in the row, you'll need to understand turning chains. Okay, so I just made an example. So this is just a half double crochet. I made my foundation chain, and then chain 2, and then I work back down. So when you reach the end of your row like this, you'll need to chain and turn your work to work back down your previous stitches. So when you start your new row, you start in the last stitch that you just made in the previous row. So you would go into here after you make your chains. So you basically disregard your chains and you don't continue working in the chain spaces unless the pattern clearly states to. So for example, if I'm using half double crochets, I will chain 2 as my turning chain. This is called turning chain. I turn my work, I flip it, and then I work back down. I'll disregard the turning chains I just made because they're only there to help your work appear straight. And then I'll create my half double crochet in the last double crochet that I made. So not these 2 chains, but I'll go back into my half double crochet that I just made, and then I'll start my round. This is the first stitch of my next round, like that. So your turning chain doesn't count as a stitch, and you won't go into it unless the pattern says to. So depending on what stitch you're using, whether it's single crochet or half double crochet and double crochet, you'll chain different lengths. And in the pattern, the right before the term turn is used, it will tell you how many chains you need to make as your turning chain. So if the pattern says half double crochet 5, chain 2, turn, then right before turn it'll say chain 2, so chain 2 will be your turning chain. So you don't go back into it, you won't count it as a stitch unless the pattern says to. So for another example could be if your pattern says single crochet 8, chain 1, turn, the final stitch count would be 8. Then you create 8 single crochets, you chain 1 as your turning chain, and then since the ending stitch count is 8, you know that the 8 is from the 8 single crochets you made, not from the turning chain. So your turning chain does not count towards, it does not count as a stitch, and it does not count your towards your total end stitch count. Here's also a table, and it will tell you how many chains to use depending on what stitch you're using. So for single crochets, you'll chain 1, half double crochet or double crochet will chain 2, and the shell stitch, which is used in the shell coaster pattern 1, you'll chain 3. And just know that don't confuse turning chains with granny square chains. Whereas turning chains don't count as stitches, granny chains are meant to act as stitches. So keep that in mind when you crochet and move on to the granny square section. So when you're working in the round, similar to this pattern, you start your project by making a magic ring or a chain using the chain 2 method, and crochet into the ring you've just created. Since it's very difficult to know when you've ended and started your round, using a stitch marker is necessary. So you can use a scrap piece of yarn to mark your stitches. You would just insert it into your first, or just instead of example, you would use it into your first stitch of your round, pull it through, and then that kind of marks your first stitch, and then your final stitch would be here, and then that's just how you know where your project ends and starts. So it can also help to find out what row you're on, or you can use a scrap piece of yarn to mark every round so you know how many rounds you made and what round you're actually on. So when you work in the round, the pattern may indicate working in each stitch around your project, and it simply means to follow the circular line of stitches that you've created instead of going back and forth like you would in a row. Additionally, the pattern may indicate if you're working in continuous rounds, and this means that when you end your round on your last stitch, you won't join the round and continue directly onto the next stitch of your next round, because sometimes it will say to slip stitch in double crochet or slip stitch into a single crochet to join. When it says join, you're joining the round. In continuous rounds, you don't join, you just start your you end your last round, and then you start directly onto your next round with your first stitch. Okay, hi guys, sorry it's the next day, but basically the next part is going to be right, wrong, and reversible sides. So as you're starting to crochet, understanding how your projects look is a very important factor and a small detail to take into consideration. So there's your right side of your work, which has a cleaner look that's refined, like the consistent V shape on your stitches, and this side is typically faced out of your project so it's visible. Then you have your wrong side, which is a messier look that's more bumpy or textured, and this side is typically hidden in your projects so that it isn't visible. This is where you would usually also be weaving in your ends. The last one is a reversible side, and this happens when you crochet in rows and you're just like you're going between right and wrong sides, so there's not like a distinct right or wrong side, like they're both technically the right side or the wrong side. So sometimes you won't have that distinct right or wrong side, and so you just basically alternate between the two, and this makes your project like reversible. So weaving in ends would be literally on any side pick what side that you want to weave in your ends and then just do that side. Next step is counting your stitches. So just a reminder, your turning chains typically don't count as stitches unless the pattern clearly states to count it as stitches. However, your slip stitches won't ever count as stitches, but some of the patterns may require you to go into the turning chains into the slip stitches. But for the final stitch count, those do not count as stitches. And then again, certain patterns will require you to go into the turning chains, such as the shell coaster. So just as a kind of a visual, this is how you would count your rows. Each of those horizontal V looking shapes with the 2 loops count as 1 stitch. And then for your rounds, again, you would just go around and count all of them in a round like this. And next step is actually counting your individual rows and rounds. So sometimes this can get a little tricky, but you just have to practice with it. For your rows, this is how you count how many rows you have. And for rounds, this would be kind of an example on how to count. There's a lot of examples out there and you can just get used to it with practice. So next step is understanding your stitches. So getting to know your stitches and your projects is an integral step to learning how to crochet, and then this can help you identify what different stitches look like, the front and the back loops, where to weave in your ends, the shape of your stitches, how to count your stitches and even your rows and rounds, mistakes you made, and how many stitches are in one stitch. So becoming familiar with the structure and how your project is looking can greatly increase your understanding of crocheting. And of course, this skill will be built upon with more practice. It's not something that you have to be good at, it's something that you will learn eventually how to be better at. But it's important to understand what you created, how you made it, and then what causes it to look how it looks, basically. Okay, so to understand your stitches, I've just created a sample project here to help you get more familiar with understanding how stitches look and the different parts of it. So first off, I'm going to explain the front loop and then the back loop. So on your stitches, just know that each stitch has a horizontal V. You can kind of see that shape. These are V's, and those V's are how you know that you've created this stitch. So how do I count my stitches? You would count the horizontal V, 1, 2, 3. And then you also know that that corresponds to the actual stitch. So the front loop is on the top of the stitch, you'll see 2 loops. So the one closest to you is the front loop, and then the loop behind you or farthest to you is going to be the back loop. So again, front loop, back loop. And if the pattern says to work in the back loop, then you'll create your stitches in this loop instead of normally going underneath through both of those loops. Another example is going to be the back bump of a chain. So you can see that I have a chain here, and the front again has your front loop and your back loop. Typically you will go in the back loop of a chain, but sometimes it may require you to go into the back bump. So if you turn your chain over, you can actually see that there's these horizontal bumps and it kind of raises up. So if you go into it, you need to go into the back bump just like this. And again, if I went to the back bump, I would need to turn over my chain and then find that little bump and go into it. That's pretty much most of what you need to know for all of these patterns. Is just what the loops are and then the back bump of a chain. And remember, this is on chains only. And then this obviously is the loop that's on your hook, and we don't count this loop as a stitch. Also, something that's just helpful to know, this is your turning chain. This is your turning chain. I accidentally chained 3, but you can tell that there's 1, 2, 3 chains before I made my double crochets. There's supposed to be 2, but I just wanted to show you that you can identify your turning chains and your actual stitches and its corresponding chain that it's into. Okay, so part 7 of this video is going to be fastening off. This is pretty simple. So when you cut your yarn, whether you're ending your project or you're color changing, you should secure your yarn so that it doesn't easily become undone, and this can be done by fastening off, also known as FO. Okay, so to fasten off, you'll typically slip stitch into the next stitch as your first step, but usually you can only do that if you're working in the round, but we're only working in a row and I can't go into any other stitch, so you would proceed straight into the next stitch. So next up, you chain 1, and then you're gonna pull your yarn about the length that you want to cut it, and this needs to be long enough to weave in your ends. So for me, that looks good, and I'll just cut this right here, and then I'll pull the chain over here. I'll pull the chain that I just made tightly so that it secures that chain that I made, and then I would weave in this end into my project. The pattern will stay if you need to slip stitch into the next stitch and then chain 1 to fasten off, or it might just say chain 1 to fasten off, and when you see that fasten off, you'll know that you're cutting your yarn, or like you're ending your project. So now that you know how to fasten off, part 8 will be about weaving in your ends. So to finish up your project fully, you'll need to know how to weave in your ends. So to do this, you are going to need a needle. So your darning or tapestry needle. So here I have lines. And to weave in your ends, if you have a wrong side, you will weave in your ends on that side. But if you have a reversible side, it doesn't really matter. But pull your yarn through your darning needle, and then you're gonna go back into the stitches that you just made, but blend in your yarn so it looks like it's a part of the stitches instead of making it look random. So I'm gonna pull through these 2 loops, for example. Pull it a little, not too tightly, or it'll disorient your stitches. Then I'll go into this one. Then I'll just kind of move down into all of these different loops that I just created. And you can see that it's kind of, if you look closely, you can see this, but if this is on the wrong side, then it doesn't matter too much because you won't see it. But you can kind of see, you can go through different loops. We can go up. And if you want to create a knot, because sometimes you need it to be extra secure, you go into your next, actually let's go into this one. Go into your next loop, pull through, but still leave a small loop. Pull your needle through that loop and then pull tightly to create a knot there. And I'll do this if I just need it to be extra secure. And then go ahead and still weave that in to the rest of your project, and then cut it off when you think you've weaved through it enough. And then you just cut through here, and then you just weaved in your first end. And then just kind of remember to stretch it a little, just so that your tail end is sitting comfortably with the project so it doesn't distort it or anything. And then just remember, don't throw your tail ends away. I'll go over later how you can use your yarn scraps so that they don't go to waste. So don't throw them away and keep them in a bag or something. Part 9 is gonna be your crochet skills. So this expands on the basics of learning how to crochet, and then these are just extensive skills that are necessary to understand how to improve your crocheting capabilities, essentially. So first off, we're gonna do how to use your stitch markers. So stitch markers are simple yet essential to keep track of your stitches in your crochet projects. Additionally, they're commonly used to mark the first stitch in each of your rows and rounds, but they can also be used, multiple markers can be used to mark each of your rows and rounds so that you can easily count and identify what round you're on a row. And then it can also tell you, you can also use it to help connect and join pieces. Like if you're connecting 2 panels, then you can mark your first stitch and your final stitch so you know where to start and where to end, and it helps keep your stitches straight and aligned. So next up is carrying your yarn. So carrying your yarn is a method used to crochet over your tail ends or for color changes. And for the color changing, it's method 3, which is the one where you hide one yarn strand with your stitches you're creating with your active yarn for as long as you need, and then you can like change colors whenever you need to. And it's like if there's more complex and more color changes, and you would typically use that method to color change. But now we're gonna go into color changes. So there's 3 methods that I've divided this up into. So 1 is gonna be tying on a new color, 2 is gonna be color changing on the last yarn over, and then 3 is gonna be carrying your yarn, similar to what I said before. So this method is the most secure and simple method to change colors, and basically you cut your original color and then tie on your new color into the last stitch or space that you made. But this creates a more abrupt color change and isn't a friendly method for more complex projects with several color changes. So for this method, with color A yarn, you want to chain 1 to secure the yarn and cut a tail end, and then that detaches the yarn color. And then this is going to be yarn color A and this is yarn color B. So insert your hook into the last stitch you made, or in the space that you want to enter. In this case, I'm going to insert my hook here. And then you're going to loop color B onto your hook and then pull through the stitch that your hook is in. Tie color B into a regular knot to secure your yarn color. Then you'll have attached color B. To continue crocheting, insert your hook, yarn over, and then pull up a loop, and then you continue crocheting as the pattern indicates. Sometimes the pattern may suggest crocheting over your tail ends, and you may do so if you want to reduce the amount of tail ends you have to weave. Otherwise, leave your tail end and then continue crocheting as normally. If not, leave your tail end on top of your work so you can crochet into it. The next method is going to be color changing on the last yarn over, also known as final stitch with new color. So this method incorporates the new color into the stitch with the old color right before a color change is needed. Sorry if that's confusing, but this is a method for a cleaner color change look, and it's fairly simple when you get the hang of it. So for this method, you're going to loop the new color on the last yarn over on the stitch right before your color change and pull through to complete the stitch. So for this example, I'm doing a double crochet. So when I have 2 loops left on my hook and it's my last yarn over, this is when I'm going to be changing my yarn color. So when I have 2 loops on my hook, I'm just going to get my new color, loop it onto my hook, and then I'm going to pull through to complete the stitch. When you complete your color change, you're going to cut your old color with the tail end, and then you're going to leave a long enough tail end for weaving, and then you're going to be tightening both of the tail ends to secure the stitch. And then you're going to crochet like normally, and whenever you need another color change, then you would just repeat the steps that we just did. Like right now is when you would complete the next color change. And then the third method is gonna be probably the hardest one to learn. This one is carrying your yarn. So without cutting your yarn, this method requires you to carry both your working yarn and this method requires you to carry both your inactive and active color at the same time. It allows you to switch colors easily, and this is also used in tapestry crochet, where you hide your inactive old color in the stitches with your active new yarn, which is what I said before. And this is used in combination of method 2, the one I just described earlier, and then you'll basically loop the new color onto the stitch before your color changes while holding your inactive yarn color. Very repetitive, but once I explain it, you would know what I mean. So for this next method, this is going to be carrying your yarn while color changing. Before you finish this previous stitch, similar to the last method, you're going to loop the new color onto that last yarn over that you have. So pull through 2 of those loops. You're going to tighten it, keeping your tension a little tighter. And then you're going to crochet over your color A yarn. So the color that you just stopped using, which is your old one. You're going to crochet over it, and then you're carrying this
inactive color with the stitches from your active color. And then when you need to complete another color change, you wait until you're in your last yarn over, drop your old yarn color, and then loop your new one. And then now you continue crocheting with your old yarn color once again, only grabbing it when you need.
So kind of similar to this, I'm going to go over crocheting over your tail ends. So crocheting over your tail ends requires you to carry your short tail ends within your project to secure the tail ends. So this makes weaving in your ends easier and faster for most of the time. This just causes your tail ends to be hidden within your project. So I recommend crocheting over your tail ends when the pattern notifies you to. So there'll be a little tip box and then it'll tell you when you should crochet over them. However, sometimes I wouldn't recommend it because it can pop out of your project and then it won't really do anything besides make the project look worse. So sometimes it is better to weave in your tail ends, but the pattern will tell you, the tutorials will tell you when you should crochet over your tail ends to save time, but it's not required if you don't want to. That just leaves more tail ends to weave in.
Okay, so when you crochet over your tail ends, when you come across your tail end, you're just gonna crochet over them. So you lay it on your work. As you can see, I'm working back down my chains, so lay it over your work. And when you crochet into the stitches that the pattern says to, you're going to be inserting your hook into the next stitch. So my next stitch is, so this will be my next stitch. So I'm going to insert it, and you want to make sure that the tail end is on top of that stitch, so it's in front of your hook. And then you're going to finish and complete your stitch with the tail end inside of that stitch. So again, you're going to go into your next stitch with your tail end over it, and you're going to finish your stitch keeping your placement with that tail end with your thumb. So continue this process until your tail end disappears or you finish crocheting and need to cut your tail end. And then when you're crocheting and you finish, make sure to stretch your project out so that your tail end can work with your project instead of causing your project to scrunch up or deform, as it can do that. So if you finished crocheting and you no longer can continue crocheting over your tail end, just cut your tail end and then it'll be hidden inside of your project so you don't have to weave in your ends. While there are many ways to connect crochet pieces together, this is the method used throughout these patterns to create a crochet seam. For these instructions, side A is the piece closest to you and side B is the side farthest from you. So first you're going to arrange your pieces, so lay out your joining pieces in its intended shape with the wrong side facing outward and the right sides facing inward. Attach your yarn to a darning or tapestry needle and cut a long piece of yarn so you have enough to connect each piece. Also make sure you leave a long enough tail end for weaving. Choose and find your starting stitch where you'll be attaching your yarn, as well as your final stitch, which is where you'll stop joining your pieces. The pattern may indicate what your starting and final stitches are. Typically this will be the farthest right corner, allowing you to seam your pieces from right to left, keeping your stitches matched up on both sides. Next, you're going to join your pieces. Insert your needle through the front loop of side A stitch. Your starting stitch will be the first chain on the right. Your needle should only go through one loop. Insert your needle through the back loop of the corresponding stitch that aligns with side B stitch. So you're going to, on side B, you're going to go into that chain. Again, your needle should only go through one loop, but you should have gone through 2 loops in total. Pull your needle through, tie a knot to secure its placement, ensuring your tail end is long enough for weaving. Now you're going to crochet a seam all the way through. Moving on to your next stitch on side A, go through the front loop. Then on the corresponding side B, you're going to go onto the next stitch in the back loop. Gently pull to connect the sides. Repeat for each stitch until you reach the end to your final stitch across the 2 pieces. Always make sure that your stitches are aligned for straight seams. Here I reach my final stitch, so I'm going to go into the front loop and then the back loop of the next corresponding stitch. And if this is the end, you'll tie a knot right here and then weave in your ends. If you'd like to add more pieces, keep this yarn attached and repeat these steps for each seam. You can add as many pieces as you'd like and make it as long as you like. Again, to end, tie a knot and weave in any remaining tail ends.
Okay, so part 10, the last part, you've made it, is going to be reusing your yarn scraps. So in this last section, I'll be showing you what you can do with your leftover yarn scraps that you saved from all of your crochet projects. So again, you can use them for stitch markers, you can make tassels or fringe for your projects, you can even save the larger scrap pieces for bigger projects, such as just like mini projects that use less yarn, or you can tie all of the longer pieces together so you make one ball of yarn that you can use to make a mini skein, and then you can use whatever you need to make a project. Or you can use them as stuffing for plushies. I often use my yarn scraps for plushies, so I just think that's a good way to reuse your yarn scraps. Congratulations, we finally made it to the end of this introductory section. So of course, keep practicing these skills until you become more familiar with crocheting, and once you practice a lot, you can begin to make and kind of work through the patterns. And I'll see you guys in the next episode where we actually learn how to read the crochet patterns. Thanks for watching this episode of Eco Threads. I hope you learned something new, and I appreciate you for all your support. Mahalo.